right now, right? That's
Okay, now we're live. Welcome back to Remote Aid. It's the end of the. Could you believe that last panel? They were in Ireland. It was like midnight, 1 a.m. How did she not have a pint in front of her? You know, I mean, that was.
it's unreasonable. Unreasonable.
Unbelievable. Well, I'm really excited to announce this next panel, talking through communication in remote teams. And if you could tell what was going on, in the green room or backstage just before this is a group that clearly knows how to communicate quite well. So I'd like to introduce CEO of SmartBug Media, Ryan Malone, also on the panel, Stacey Elliott, Chauthra Ali, and Sharon Koifman. Take it away, guys. Really looking forward to this.
Hey, thanks a lot, Danny. Hey, everybody. First of all, thanks a lot to all the Remote Aid 2020 team and for the Running Remote team, just for the leadership and putting on this event. With remote being such a reality now, and a lot of us are thrust in it, I think we've probably heard over the last couple of weeks things about what to expect and technology tools and home setups and embracing family and all that stuff. But with this new normal, to me, communication is really, and how you do it is really going to separate the winners from the people that struggle in this new normal. And that's really kind of why we're here today. So to help you learn, how to communicate the best in a remote model, to help you gain some of the skills to avoid some of the pitfalls that you really want to avoid as you do this. And so to help us answer some of these questions, I'm really, really proud and excited to put together a team of remote industry veterans from different industries, different company sizes, and different viewpoints. And so my name is Ryan Malone. I'm the founder and CEO of SmartBug Media. We're a remote first 85-person company. And I'd like to introduce the rest of our panel. So Chauthra, why don't you start?
Hey everybody, I'm here in Santa Monica, California, and I'm from Recharge Payments, and we are the leading subscription billing platform for physical goods. So if you're subscribing to anything at home, most likely you checked out through our checkout. So for us, we're 160 people, all remote first as well, and we span about 10 different countries.
That's awesome. Stacey, how about you?
Oh, hey there, everyone. So glad you all could join for Remote Aid. I'm Stacey Elliott. I have worked at Microsoft for about 24 years, and I've been remote for 17 of those. I currently live in Dallas, Texas, but my job is based out of our Redmond, Washington headquarters. We have a variety of folks across the company who work in flexible work arrangements, and we have about 140,000 employees in 190 countries. So big scale, but remote is still an important part, and certainly something that small company, large company, you can relate to sort of the different elements that are needed to be successful in a remote situation and communication.
Thank you so much, Sharon. Can you give us a little background?
Sure. My name is Sharon Koifman. I run a company called Distant Job, which is a very unique recruitment agency that specializes in remote employees. That means we go all over the world. We find some of the smartest, best talents, and they work remotely for North American and Western technology companies. And we're slowly expanding to accounting and other niches. I myself have been working in the remote environment for nearly 17 years. I had 3 companies, all of them ran from my own computers. All the employees were always distributed. And today we barely have anyone that actually works in the same country. I myself in Canada, I don't have other employees in Canada. This is part of the fun of what I do.
That's awesome. So guys, everyone, we're going to try to tackle 3 big issues today. The first one is some of the challenges that you're going to experience when you get thrust into remote. The second one, and I think this is the one that people don't talk about a lot, but it's really important, which is how do managers have to adapt their communication in order to be successful? And then the third one is that, COVID's real, and it might have a negative impact on this whole remote movement that we all care about so much. So we're going to dig into that a little bit. So let's start with communication challenges first. Like I mentioned before, I think it can be the difference between being a winner and being a struggler. And so for the panel, what do you see as the biggest communication challenge that people will face as we kind of get thrust into this all remote environment, sometimes without much choice? So Chauthra, maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, so when you think about companies that maybe go from an in-office environment to now fully online, the things that you could start to think about actually move beyond just the day-to-day. Seeing as how many of the companies that are just 100, 200, 500,000 people, they're going to start facing certain initiatives that they're going to have to roll out, right? So when it comes to communication, we think about, how do we actually get that kind of message across? For something like a big initiative, a benefit that you're going to start to offer your employees while they work remotely. So those types of big initiatives are actually hard to communicate when you only use one medium. So at Recharge, we've definitely stumbled along the way for the last 5 years, but one of the biggest things we've learned is when it comes to these big initiatives, that you actually have to communicate the message in multiple mediums. So it's not just good enough to do it in your instant messenger communication platform, whether you're using Slack or a different tool. Beyond the instant message, you actually have to make an announcement via email. For us, we actually also hit it home a third time at our biweekly town halls, where we do an all hands company meeting. So we're actually, for any large piece of communication, not just putting it on Slack once and assuming that everybody sees it, understanding that everyone's in different time zones. So whether you put something out at 9 a.m. EST, that's 6 a.m. for the rest of us in PST, for example. So definitely putting out large piece of communication via Slack, email, and an all company meeting is always recommended.
That's really interesting. Stacy, how do you think that contrasts with what you guys are doing at Microsoft?
Oh, I think it's so consistent. In my introduction, I didn't mention actually what my specific job is, so I'm going to talk a little bit about that, which is that I support our Chief People Officer and assist with her executive communications, both inside and outside the company. And I think Chatri's point about, the communicate is so critical when you're rolling out things. I also think that another element that's really important when you have distributed teams is that ability to feel present and personal when you're communicating. And so figuring out ways to use the technology where, if you're giving a presentation and, you're sharing information at a town hall or an event, you and your audience are pretty separated in that room. When we're all here, we're 18 inches apart from one another, right? So how can you build the types of communication where your leaders are personally engaging with employees and developing a listening system that allows you, in the case of the benefits that Chatri mentioned, to get feedback on that. How is that working? How are people engaging? Are they understanding what you're communicating? So making sure that you have a really good employee listening element is really important. And I think big or small size companies can benefit from that for sure.
That's interesting. I know, like in our company, we found that the more that people have some affinity with each other, the easier communication was. So we did things like we do a get to know you call with every single employee at the company. So when you start, you meet everybody, and the only rule is you can't talk about work. And we found that was something that really kind of greased the skids so that people felt more comfortable with each other. And I was curious, Sharon, so, you mentioned earlier that you've got so many people in so many different areas. And I was wondering what kind of challenges you've seen in your environment.
The biggest challenges for me is getting to know the people that are actually working for me. I mean, when you're remote, when you're a remote manager, you clearly have a disconnect. You clearly don't have this daily physical connection where everybody is checking on each other and seeing what a person is doing and how they're feeling and what's going on with them. In a remote environment, you don't have that luxury. So you actually need to put an extra effort. I actually today in one of the speeches, somebody used the word overcommunication. So this is an absolute requirement to continuously verify that your team are still motivated, are still energetic, or they're not burned out. You need to take those extra steps. The second biggest challenge is the ability to create a culture. when you have people, I mean, a few people have been discussing about this, but it is a major challenge that when you're in a physical environment, you got your bars, you got your happy hours, you got your parties, and suddenly you want to create some kind of an experience, a connecting experience between your team, um, in order to have the same connection. That's pretty much what culture is all about. Culture is about creating a connection. So you have better teamwork and people are connected better to your country. And all that comes with better communication.
Stacy, you got to share that story that you told us about Satya Nadella, like when we did our preparation. I thought that was so cool because, you know, you guys are super massive and it was so personal. Would you mind sharing it with everybody?
Right. Well, I think when he came into his role several years ago, he was only our third CEO in the history of the company. And so being able to connect with employees around the world was really important to him. And I think to Sharon's point, the culture and ensuring that he was sharing his views on the culture and what we were trying to do to evolve our culture. And so it was important to him to be, you know, present and personal at scale, right? He can't travel around as much as he'd like to every country and be there all the time. And so he started to hold these town hall Q&As where we would use our technology. Folks would tune in either on, you know, live or on demand later. And he continued to do that, rolled out videos where he was sharing his thoughts about things and really, you know, connecting with employees. And I would suspect that if he walked into an office today and you hadn't ever met him, you would still feel like you know him, because he was really making that effort to connect with employees, share his ideas, share the strategy, share his perspective on culture, and ensure that everyone was connected to what we were trying to do across the company.
That was cool. I really enjoyed hearing that. You know, it's interesting if you think about that. I think it's a sign of really good management and having the foresight to be able to really get a feel for what people are feeling, especially in remote where you don't have a lot of nonverbal communications to draw off of. And so I want to transition to the next section, which is about managing and adapting communications. And I know when we all talked about this during our session, it was probably one of the most passionate areas of our discussion. And I was curious, maybe we can start with the first line of questioning here, and we'll start with you, Sharon, is, you know, what do you see as the biggest difference between, say, in-house management or an in-house manager and a remote first, remote majority type manager, and how those might be different?
So for me, I know a lot of people discuss how when you go remote, everything changes, or so much changes, or you need to change your mentality. I personally feel that remote is not such a big step towards from your office experience. The only difference, what happens is when you transfer to your remote, many people realize that they were not such great managers. There's unfortunately a lot of people that compensate for the fact that people are hanging around. They check, like I said before, they check on each other, they motivate each other. And here you actually need to do a real management job. I mean, just a week ago, I had a written interview, and the interviewer was asking, how do you, if you get burned out, how do you communicate to your manager? And I personally said, I can't answer this question, because how to play politics in an office, it requires a completely separate book, right? What really is happening is the fact that you need to ask your question as an employee means your manager has failed you. And so so again, at the end of the day, it's not such a big change if you're an excellent manager, if you really went through all the steps, if you really do check on your people, you really motivate them, you really inspire them, you teach them, you do everything the management has to do. You check on their emotional status, you get to know them. You should do this in the office. If you actually are accountable to your people in the office, it's not such a big step, but many people don't.
What a question. I was just looking at the chat, and a question came through about, and it's kind of like it sits on the intersection between communication and management. And so the question was effectively, at what point, you know, as a manager or a leader of teams in a remote world, are you over communicating to the point where there's either kind of a saturation or there creates this need to be always present on the receiver end of the communication. And I was curious, and maybe Stacy, we can start with you. If you see, like, how do you moderate that? How do you modulate that level and try to understand where the right sweet spot is?
It's interesting. It's an interesting question because, we as a company, we've moved into this, everyone is remote, or the majority of our folks are working remote. And, but this question, I think, can be applied to both remote or in person, especially when we're all using email and technology and chat. One of the things that we've tried to encourage at our company is to be respectful of everyone's time, and ensuring that you're not, as a manager, sending mails after hours. We've got lots of data on work health satisfaction from employees, and when managers send lots of mail after hours or on the weekends, the work health happiness goes down. There's a direct correlation to that. So we've been discussing that, and I think you can kind of see those sorts of things right in this environment, just ensuring that you're respectful and checking in, asking if people are okay, how are they doing, but also being respectful of their time and certainly what's going on in the background in their homes when they're working from home. And that's, of course, a COVID example, but others may also have some thoughts about that in terms of just general remote work.
Yeah, I could chime in just real quick. I have two thoughts on that. To answer the question, which is, one, I would consider the objective, right? So if your objective is, the item I discussed earlier, which is an announcement versus an update versus a check-in, I would consider, like, what's your objective in communicating to either your team member or your team, and then with that, kind of understand what the right cadence would be. So to the point about over communication, maybe you don't need a weekly all hands, but rather a bi-weekly, or even for very large companies, once a month. And with regard to teams, do you need a daily stand-up every day? Perhaps not. So I've actually talked to a lot of different teams about reducing the cadence in terms of what they're communicating, just to match the objective. And then secondly, with regard to kind of being considerate about the team member. So you probably already read a lot about asynchronous communication, synchronous communication, what's right. For us, we consider the instant side of things as a distraction. It can actually be very distracting. So to combat that, we've encouraged folks to put your notifications to be off if you're going into a focused zone. So you only absorb that communication, inbound communication, when you're ready. Or conversely, for myself as a leader, I'll actually put in my message to folks, either email or instant message, not urgent. It's more just top of mind. Here's my instant message to you, understanding that it's not something that they need to hustle on in their moment and get distracted. So it's very much a two-way street with regard to a lead and their team member. And so I think even those small nuances can actually make a big change.
So let's go, but let's stay with you, Chathri. And I want to understand, we talked a little bit earlier about, how do you check on the mental health or just kind of the well-being of your team when everybody's remote? And we talk about the checking, but I was curious from all of you guys, can you share something with the audience about some tactics that you use to check on them that are human, even though we're not next to each other? And I'm just curious, some tricks of the trade that you guys might want to share with people.
Yeah, when our entire environment changed a month ago, we started out with, in the first 2 weeks, a daily check-in, half an hour, no agenda, no script, no outcomes that we needed. And again, 30 minutes. And we had a good majority of our team join, in variety over the course of the first 2 weeks. And then beyond that, in terms of check-ins, we scaled it back a little, so it wasn't every day. And then we encouraged our leads to make sure that they were maintaining their one-on-ones. A lot of them weren't as disciplined about making sure those one-on-ones were happening. And so just asking the question, and without diving into the tactical part of a one-on-one, starting with, how are you doing? How's your family? And really opening up and giving permission to that team member to just really, pour their heart out if they were ready to. And if not, they could just respond as they wanted to. But creating those those avenues for that team member to give feedback. And then I would just end with, we just last Thursday put out a survey. Actually, we have a tool that we use where we're really quickly, easily able to spin up a survey and gather responses from our team. You know, how did we do in terms of communication? Is there anything else you need from all the wellness perks that we've added on at this time? And going back to what Stacey was saying about a feedback loop, that communication feedback loop has been really helpful for us.
If we would spend about 10% of the meetings that most companies have, which is by far the most distracting thing in most physical offices and in remote environment. I mean, I had bad habits 5 years ago where I would literally just write hi to everybody because I wanted to talk to them, and I completely distracted them. But if we would spend about 10% of those meetings hours just talking about nice things, just talking about social aspects. I mean, we don't need 80% of the discussions that we have with people about technical stuff and whatever we need to accomplish if we just take some of that investment and make it social. I mean, in our company, we try to have board games. We actually play Cards Against Humanity, which is a little scary for me sometimes because I'm always afraid that I'm going to hurt somebody's feelings, but everybody's having a blast. So we play it virtually, and we have drinks, which seems to be a popular strategy. But we also have this app called Donut on Slack that forces two people to just hang out with each other and get to know each other. And every time that I hang out with somebody, I try to communicate with them that, oh, did we just lose Ryan? That's am I taking over the moderation? What's happening? Anyways, but we'll continue the discussion. But I try to communicate, and I repeat, because repetition is the only way to go about this, is that anytime that you feel burned out, anytime that you have a mental health issue, depressed, or anything of that sort, please tell me anonymously, or please tell your manager. And it doesn't always work. Bosses intimidate their employees. This is a fact. But with repetition, it does work eventually.
One thing I've found that's really helped, just to dovetail off of that, is having the leadership show a little bit of vulnerability. And I'm sure many people here have watched, Brene Brown's talk about vulnerability from a leadership standpoint, and just giving an inch, you can actually get a mile back, right? So one of the things we do, and again, I keep talking about our town hall, but I think, there's a lot that can come from 1 hour of time. Our CEO does a failure and success of the week. So we'll actually talk about a failure. It might be his own. It might be a certain team that he wanted to highlight in terms of a failure, and conversely a success. And just opening up and talking about that. And then conversely, a failure, or rather even himself, how he's coping with being at home. For someone who usually has a lot of control over a situation, and especially all of us as leaders, we like having, a little bit of a say in how we run our days. Just saying how we've been personally struggling, I think then again gives that permission to our team to have these types of open conversations that Sharon's talking about with their leadership.
Yeah, I could add to that.
Really,
go
ahead.
I was going to say, I could add to that. Thank you. Sorry. We have a model at Microsoft that we rolled out. It was probably about a year for our managers. We have about 16,000 managers around the world, and it's called, the framework is called Model Coach Care. And so, what you were describing about modeling that behavior. So, especially in this time of COVID, showing that you're taking some time for yourself, being able to demonstrate the behaviors that you're asking people to model with their teams. And then, coaching people through what's going on, helping them with their productivity to prioritize. Not everything is going to be urgent at this time. There are other priorities that may be coming to the top. And the third piece, which I don't think we knew it was important, but in this moment, that aspect of caring is so critical, because if every manager at the company is really living our framework of Model Coach Care, there is someone caring about every employee and making sure they're okay and connecting with them. And I think that piece about care, and you've both mentioned it as well, is really critical when you're not working in the same place. It's just such an important aspect to know that there's someone that's connecting with you. And Ryan's back.
If you, hey, welcome back. Hey, Ryan.
Sorry, when there's 500,000 attendees, I don't think my Mac could handle it. So
I know, right?
Oh boy.
Sorry about that. I was going to share one piece
for that, Ryan, about that Mac, but I'm not going to say it.
I know I was going to tee myself up for it, but
everybody needs a good embarrassing.
I know.
It's part of life. Especially this is the right time for it.
One thing I want to add to that, because I know where you guys are headed, is we took this. We call it healthy smart bugs. So we had this idea that as a parent, your job is to keep your kids happy, healthy, safe, and resilient so they can do it on their own. So we decided to do that for our company, and we will literally call an employee and just say, how can SmartBug be healthier? And it's kind of an open-ended question, but the feedback that you get when you're staring one-on-one at somebody is what we found is, it's not the most scalable thing, but it is so much more effective than, pick a tool out there that you're asking for feedback or EMPS or any of that stuff, because you get the why behind it. And it's just been like game-changing for us in terms of our culture. So on the managing side, I think that was a pretty cool topic for everybody. I was curious if you flip it, and we talk a lot about how managers can be better managers, but it's not all about managing down. There's a lot of managing up. And so I was curious what advice you might have for people out there who maybe don't manage a team, or maybe they are being managed by somebody who's not the best at doing it remotely. And I was curious how you might recommend that they manage up.
What amazing opportunity to step up. I mean, you're literally going from dinosaur companies where the managers have no clue how to use half the technologies and they're going remote, and suddenly you, Mr. Introvert, nobody has ever heard a peep out of you, and you understand all the technology and you understand all the communication tools, and suddenly you can introduce your bosses and your managers to this new process. What an opportunity to grow in the company. This is the time of the introverts. I'm intimidated. I'm not such an introvert myself. I'm going crazy. Sometimes I'm running from wall to wall with this a new COVID, because I have kids popping. I'm surprised they didn't pop up yet. But this is the time of the introverts to go and to step up and to show the managers what they're all about. So I recommend them to learn all the management tools and introduce their bosses to it.
Chatri, what do you think?
Well, one thing that we've done, and again, this might be a great idea to manage up with, but we've actually followed. So her name is, gosh, it's escaping right now. Well, it's the CEO of Stripe, but Claire Hughes Johnson. There we go. So the CEO of Stripe, Claire, she actually has created the concept of a user manual to how to work with her. And when she entered Stripe, used that manual to say, here's how to work with me. And so in terms of managing up, I think a great tool, and if you just Google Guide to Working with Claire, and kind of go into the various sections, it's, here's what to bring to my attention. Here's things that make me impatient. Here's my personality type. So not assuming, that everybody's an introvert or an extrovert. In fact, my entire team, half of my team, is a little bit of both. So they certain aspects make them introverted, certain aspects make them extroverted. So I never like to assume. And so using this guide to working with me to manage up and say, hey, as a team, it doesn't have to be the whole company, but as a team, could we try this out just to make sure that we're not assuming anything about anybody in this current environment, right? And creating that user manual for your team. Again, it could be just 5 or 6 people. And it's a great conversation starter, especially the section where it's, I get impatient with X, Y, and Z. You learn a lot about your coworkers when you start asking or posing that question. And then just to end, to manage up, it's the opportunity for that manager to use that, unofficial user manual, if they've been managing that person for 2 years or 2 months, to say, wow, this is one thing I didn't know about you. I'll definitely change that aspect of how we communicate, or maybe how we work on projects together. Because in this, video call, instant message world, there's a lot of assumptions that can take place. And the more you can kind of break those apart or break those down, the more you can get done quicker.
Thank you. So, hey, we have maybe 2 minutes left. So I want to end with a section that, Stacy, you brought up on our call, and I think it's really important. And so the background is basically, at some point, COVID's going to go away, and you're going to have, a lot of impressions that people have of what remote is good and bad. And I'd like to get the three of you just very quickly. What are some things that you think that we should be cautious of being thrust into this for a reason that we may not otherwise have wanted to be, that when it ends, that we don't get a bad taste or a misconception from something? And we'll start with you, Stacy.
Yes, I mean, having worked remotely for so long, and the majority of employees at Microsoft don't work remotely, but we have a lot that do. I was just really surprised at the feedback that I got, early on, when people were working from home, and their perceptions were, oh my gosh, I hate this. It's so hard. And I was like, whoa. I don't like this either, right? My kids are on the other side of the door asking for dinner, right? So, I mean, it's a very different environment today in COVID. And so I want to make sure we are really cautious about drawing conclusions about the positive or negative aspects of working remotely in the current required remote scenario, because this is not flexible at all. We're all being required to work in a remote situation, and that is not a flexible work arrangement. So that I would say that's, around productivity and around satisfaction of working in a remote situation. I think we need to be very careful about how we think about that. I do think the best thing about it is proof of concept. We're all doing it. Business is still continuing. People are still connecting. So yes, that's very exciting, because I think the doors are going to blow off the potential for people to work remote, especially from companies who have been a lot slower to embrace and adopt it.
Sharon, what about yourself?
I think this is a wake-up call. This is a wake-up call for the managers that did not realize that they're not doing enough. This is a wake-up call for the workers who suddenly see this amazing opportunity to work more comfortably and happier and become more independent. This is a wake-up call for the bosses who suddenly see this incredible surge in productivity. Holy moly, this could change so much. We have no idea. It all depends how long COVID will last. But if it's going to last 2 years, people are going to get used to it. And the reality is that we might not come back to the office. So you're talking about what's going to happen when they're going to come to the office. I feel many companies will not, because it will work so well. At least that's my optimistic look on things.
Yeah, everything they just said, I echo what Stacy said with regard to my friends who work in an office environment who are not really loving life right now. And I said, this isn't forever. You have to have that balance. I think that's the word you have to remember, is that balance between what's actually possible. And so I echo also what Sharon said, which is, this is our new normal. We all should be thinking about the next normal. What's next? Because I think that's going to be truly how we all connect and collaborate in the future.
Yep. So mine would be to, people are going to behave in their adapted style, not necessarily their normal style, because there's some stress going on. And then the other thing is, if you look at the positive thing, I'm just looking at the chat window and all the amazing people that you get a chance to meet that you otherwise wouldn't have. So with that, thanks everybody. Thanks Stacy, thanks Chaudhry, thanks Sharon, and thanks to the Remote Aid people for putting on a great event, and have a great day.
Bye.